Brad Edwards, I hope all is well. Welcome into the game in T-Town.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, it's funny. I heard you talking about how spoiled the fan base is, another national championship game, and it reminded me of a friend of mine, and this was 2 or 3 years ago that she did this. Someone I had gone to a school with at Alabama had texted me about all of the money that she and her husband had spent, going to see Alabama play in all these, neutral site season openers and SEC championship games, semifinals, national championship games, et cetera. And I know you're very well aware of the whole Built by Bama thing. And so
Sure.
she sent this message with the hashtag Broke by Bama, which is just I've thought about that before. Like the diehard Alabama fan who tries to go to as many of these games as possible. How much money have those people spent on flights, hotel rooms, gas mileage, tickets, tickets, not the least of them. I mean, you name it. It's amazing. But I think so many of them recognize that as unlikely as it is that it's lasted for this long, at some point it's going to end. And you want to savor it for as long as you can.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to get a little bit of a break on tickets. If you don't have your tickets, go to StubHub.com or any of your favorite ticket places. Looks like these tickets are falling like, AOL stock exchange.
Yeah, and that's predictable too. Given, and it's funny because you go back to the first championship game that Alabama and Clemson played against each other, where that was the first time that Clemson had been on the national radar in a long, long time. And even the second one, was still a relatively new experience for Clemson. And now their fans are getting almost as spoiled as Alabama's, where they, not only expected to be here, but, probably have people who said, you know what, I've been to these games before. I've seen my team win a championship. I'm going to sit this one out. Or either they just decided, hey, you know what, I'm going to, go to the semifinal game because it's a little bit closer, but and it's over the holiday season. I'm not going to bother with the national championship game. So this is kind of a worst case scenario attendance wise, I think, to have the game in not just in California, but in an area that really is not college sports friendly. I'm still not sure why they thought it was a great location. But along with that, to have two Southeastern teams who have been there for the last few years, and it's not anything special for their fan bases either. So, look, if this game sells out, I mean, if we're seeing a full stadium on TV Monday night, I think it's a sign that they could pretty much put this game anywhere and it's going to sell out. But if there is ever going to be a question as to whether you can accomplish that anywhere in the country, it will be this one.
We're talking to Brad Edwards, ESPN college football analyst. Brad, I'd like to go back to Oklahoma just for a couple of minutes before we begin to break down Alabama and Clemson from a scheme standpoint, kind of what you expect. Let's look back at Oklahoma. Maybe your biggest takeaway from watching Alabama get the job done there in South Florida.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway was that I was disappointed that we didn't get to see how many points Alabama could have scored if they had really tried. And I'm not saying they weren't trying offensively. I mean, clearly they were. But getting up 28-0 the way they did, as much as I didn't want to see it, Saban did the smart thing, which was at that point just start to work on the clock and minimize possessions, knowing that, look, if you score on half of your drives the rest of the game, Oklahoma's not going to have enough possessions left if you're managing the clock correctly to be able to make that comeback. And sure enough, that was the way that it played out. So, we did see Alabama just kind of start to go run heavy and really use that clock. And, of course, the other thing is that Alabama at that point had the luxury of playing Oklahoma defensively in a way where they were just kind of keeping everything in front of them. And with the exception of that one long touchdown pass where they let the receiver get behind them, Oklahoma, for the most part, was having to put together extended drives, even a couple of them that ended in field goals, where they were using a lot more clock than they're used to. And so I think it was kind of frustrating to them as well. But ultimately, Alabama, the offense was what we expected it to be in this game. It was sharp early. Tua looked like he did in the first 2 months of the season, which is about as much as you could have hoped for. And the defense was, enough of a factor in the first quarter that it didn't need to play that great the rest of the way. And that was pretty much the way I saw it.
Brad, how much do you think some of the wrinkles that they were showing was to make Clemson think about it. You put Jalen Hurts and Tua on the field multiple times, and how much is that to maybe spend a little time for Clemson, give them something a little extra to think about?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that's part of it. I would actually love to go back and look at everything they've done in that package this season, and I'm guessing it's got to be fewer than 20 plays total. But is there a common thread? Is there something that if you're kind of scouting it as an opponent that you see, okay, whenever Hurts is on the field with Tua, they always do this or this, because if that's the case, they might be setting up something else off of it that we haven't seen yet. In fact, you would think it's almost a given that that's what they're doing, is that at some point, someone's going to be used as a decoy, and they're going to end up doing something unexpected out of this that maybe doesn't involve either one of them. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for. But yeah, I think that definitely it's something that Clemson has to spend a little bit more time on in practice, is getting ready for this one package that who knows? I mean, there's a chance that they might not see it at all. But if they do see it, I wouldn't imagine it would be for, more than 5 to 8 plays. Unless Alabama has a ton of success with it, then I would assume they would keep doing it.
Brad, this is going to sound like an odd question. Certainly they're 14-0 and earned the right to be there. But do you feel like that we know something about this Clemson team, even when you look back at Notre Dame? Not the toughest of tests. I mean, I think they played, 3 ranked teams. When you look at their schedule, they played NC State and Boston College was also ranked, and Notre Dame. They played 3 ranked teams. Do you feel like we really know what this Clemson team is made of?
I had questions going into the Clemson game, Clemson-Notre Dame game, because that was really the case for both teams. It was outside of Notre Dame's season opener against Michigan. Neither one of them had played a top 15 team by the selection committee. And so I was like, what do you make out of that? Because, it was the best team that either had faced this year. I mean, I'm still not sure that Notre Dame is a good bit better than A&M, which obviously was the best team that Clemson had played up to that point. So maybe we still don't know a whole lot, although I guess one of my takeaways from the game is that Clemson, and this is kind of something we all knew going in, is that Clemson is just a more talented team than Notre Dame. And that's basically what that game came down to, especially when Notre Dame lost its top defensive back for a good portion of the first half. Clemson was able to exploit the backups in the secondary that Notre Dame had to put in, or at least the one backup at corner. And that was responsible for a couple of those big plays. And then just overall, just the athleticism of Notre Dame in the secondary is not what an Alabama has. Now, certainly we've seen Alabama give up some plays in the secondary. Just because you're a great athlete doesn't mean you're always going to be in position or always going to get your head turned and all that stuff. But yeah, we saw Clemson make, I guess, 4 really big plays in that game. But outside of that, they weren't great offensively. And I realize that's a big part of the game. It's not like you can pretend like those didn't happen, but I do wonder, will they be able to hit plays like that against Alabama, or will they be able to hit more than one of them? And if they don't, I don't know. I mean, look, they're a better offense than they were last year. We saw what happened a year ago when Alabama took away their running game. And I look, except for one run in the second half, Notre Dame took away their running game in the semifinal. And so I don't think it's far-fetched to think that Clemson's going to struggle to really establish the run against Alabama, and it's probably going to come down to Trevor Lawrence. I just can't help but think that Alabama is going to get more pressure on Lawrence than Notre Dame did. And that, to me, is what it's going to come down to. I don't know whether Alabama's secondary can cover those Clemson receivers. The question is, will Lawrence have as much time to throw as he did in this game? Because kind of to your point about what do we really know about Clemson, Alabama is by far the best defense that they will have faced all season. And I think that's something that Alabama has in its favor, in the same way that Alabama was by far the best defense Oklahoma had faced all season. And even, what is arguably one of the greatest offenses in the history of college football that Oklahoma has this year, it took them a full quarter to adjust to playing a defense that was that good. And they had good success after that. And you wonder, will that be the same type of adjustment for Clemson as they go up against a defensive front that's far superior to anything they've faced so far?
We're talking to Brad Edwards. We talk to him every single week. He's from ESPN College Game Day on ESPN Radio that you hear here on Tide 102.9 as they cover college football comprehensively. And we've spoken with him when Dabo made the move from Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence. I think the same week or the following week, we'd ask you about how much was that move to look ahead. Not that you could assume that they were going to be there, but with that schedule, you could almost assume. How much was that move made for Monday night? How much was the move from Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence made? Because I don't think Dabo could look at Kelly Bryant and say, we've already tried that again. We got to have more better play out of the quarterback looking back.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that was a big part of it. And we said it at the time, and I think it rings even more true now than it did then. I was looking back at last year's game, and I mean, sure, Clemson was held without a touchdown. They had, fewer than 200 yards of total offense. And then to me, the biggest stat of that game was that with Clemson throwing the ball was 0 for 4 on passes 15 or more yards downfield from the line of scrimmage. And that was something that Dabo knew, especially given how hard it is to run the ball in Alabama, that in order to beat that team, you have to be able to threaten them down the field, and you weren't getting that from Bryant. And this is something that Trevor Lawrence very clearly gives you. We saw that in the semifinal. Even if that Notre Dame game was the only time you watched Clemson play all year, you can see that they're much more dangerous in that aspect than they were a year ago. And so that is a concern. I still come back, though, to the key being what kind of pressure can Alabama get on Lawrence? Quinnen Williams was just an absolute beast against Oklahoma. And I know he really has been for most of the season already. But Oklahoma has not only arguably the best offensive line in college football, but their center, even though he's a freshman, I'm telling you, this kid, Creed Humphrey, he is a really, really good center. And Quinnen Williams ate his lunch for most of that game. And I cannot imagine that he's not going to do that even more so against Clemson. I expect him to be, in the backfield. And here's the thing. When you get that pressure up the middle, like that's the pressure that's the worst for a quarterback when it's coming right at you. That's the hardest pressure to dodge. And not to mention it's kind of right in your face as you're trying to deliver the ball. And so I think that's going to be the challenge. If they can't block Quinnen Williams, is what that does to kind of disrupt everything that Clemson's trying to do offensively. I was looking at some of the stats that we track here, and Trevor Lawrence he's obviously a really good quarterback, and he's really good in a lot of areas, but maybe his weakest area of everything is his accuracy when he's under pressure and it's not a blitz. And the reason I put that last condition on there is because he's very good against the blitz. And any quarterback who can survey a defense pre-snap and see the blitz coming, you're going to be under pressure, and you're prepared for it. And you know where you want to go with the ball. It's just being able to hold it to the last second before that hit comes and get the ball out. It's when you don't expect the pressure that it's more difficult to deal with. And Alabama, by our metrics, is the best defense in college football at pressuring opposing quarterbacks without blitzing. And Williams is a big part of that. And so Trevor Lawrence, according to our numbers, is 112th nationally in completion percentage when he is pressured without there being a blitz. And so this, to me, is one of the keys of the game. Now, of course, the other question that this raises is how big of a factor is it if Christian Miller is not able to play? Because he obviously is a part of that as well, Alabama's ability to get pressure without blitzing. And so I think that's just a major thing to keep an eye on as you watch this game is, can Alabama consistently get pressure on Lawrence without blitzing? Because that's something, it's one of the few things he's not handled well in his freshman year.
Brad, is there a concern for Clemson fans? Because we hear a lot about their secondary, and we hear that it's, they've given up a lot of yards. I mean, I look back at Jake Bentley. He had pretty much a career day. You go back to Texas A&M, they threw for quite a bit. Is that still a concern going into this game? They've still got some question marks in their secondary?
So I think it is. Now, look, I give them a lot of credit because I expected Notre Dame to do a better job throwing against them than they did. Clemson, really shut down Notre Dame's offense, much more so than expected. But, look, they're even without Dexter Lawrence in there, they're still a really difficult team to run the ball on, and that would be the weakness if they have one. It's the secondary. And look, Jake Bentley and Kellen Mond are not two of the great passing quarterbacks in college football. They're not bad. But they're not going to be two of the guys you're going to come up with with a list of five if you're asking who are the most dangerous guys throwing the ball out there. I think Tua would be, and this is where I think it's easy to look back if you're kind of lazy about it and you just look back and you say, Clemson's defense really handled Alabama's offense pretty well the last 2 years. Well, those two teams were very different in that those were both run-first offenses for Alabama that, to be quite frank, and we all saw it, were not great throwing the ball down the field. This year, I think for the first time under Saban, Alabama has an offense that is really pass-first in its identity. And I think that gives Alabama, I don't want to say an advantage because Clemson's defense is too good for you to say anyone has an advantage on them. But I think certainly from a matchup standpoint, the fact that Alabama is as good as they are throwing the ball gives them a much better chance to have success than any team that's faced that Clemson defense so far this year, and certainly more success or more of a chance of success than Alabama had going in against that defense the previous couple of years. So I think that's a really important aspect of this game is that Alabama's offensive identity has changed, and if they throw the ball and if they can protect the way that they have for most of the season, then I think there will be plays to be made.
Brad, our final question is we are now 120-something hours away, 124 hours away from Alabama-Clemson. Which way are you leaning?
Oh, I'm leaning Alabama. And look, this is not a slam dunk. I had no doubt whatsoever they were going to beat Oklahoma. In fact, that Bowl Mania thing, I don't know if you do it on ESPN or any of those bowl pools where you pick all the games and then you give them confidence points.
Sure.
Rank all the Alabama beating Oklahoma was my most confidence in any bowl game of the entire bowl season. I didn't think there was any chance Oklahoma had of winning that game. That's certainly not the case here. Clemson has a chance, and look, even as much as Vegas would lead you to believe that Alabama is a comfortable favorite, our FPI thinks this is basically a toss-up. Alabama is considered by FPI to be 0.3 of a point better than Clemson.
Oh, wow.
And it's basically a pick 'em. Now, the things that I just mentioned to you, though, are the reasons that I like Alabama. It's not that Alabama is significantly better or significantly more talented overall. It's these matchups, in that I think Alabama can get pressure on Trevor Lawrence and in doing so negate whatever advantage they might have with their receivers against the Alabama secondary. And then on the other side, I think, with Alabama's passing game being good enough to exploit whatever, so-called weakness there may be in Clemson's defense, I like those matchups for Alabama. And so I think that makes them a clear favorite to me. It certainly doesn't put them in a position where they can afford to make mistakes. Certainly not the types of mistakes they made with penalties the other night. Can't afford to do that, but I'm definitely leaning Alabama here. And one thing I'll close with, Ryan, I thought this was maybe the most interesting thing I've found so far on this game, is we have FPI going all the way back to the 2005 season. And over that time, there have been almost 11,000 games played between FBS teams. Only 2 of those nearly 11,000 games were between 2 teams that were both, according to FPI, more than 31 points better than an average team. There's this game coming up on Monday night, and the only other one was the 2006 Rose Bowl, which was that epic Texas-USC game. And I think because people are so focused on this being round 4 between Alabama and Clemson, they're kind of looking at it as, it's another Alabama-Clemson game. This isn't just another Alabama-Clemson game. This isn't just a matchup of 2 undefeated teams for the national championship. This is one of the greatest games in terms of just the overall talent level and dominance level between 2 teams that have ever met for the national championship or even in the regular season. And so I think from that perspective, this is, I think it's a it's a much greater game matchup-wise than most people are realizing because they're so focused on it being the fourth time in 4 years they played in the playoff. But this is I think most Alabama fans would say this is Alabama's best team under Saban, and I think Clemson fans would tell you the same thing, that even as much as they love Deshaun Watson, when you combine what Trevor Lawrence can do, which he's not at Deshaun Watson's level quite yet, but you combine that with how much better they are defensively than they were in any of those previous years, I think this is their best team. So just a little perspective for people as you get ready to watch this one. This is one of the greatest single-game matchups that we've ever seen in college football.
Wow. Brad Edwards, I don't think anybody could have done any better, man. That's why we wanted you to lean out as we begin to shift past Oklahoma and get to this Clemson-Alabama coverage. Brad, as always, thank you again for being a part of the show, and Happy New Year to you, my friend.
All right, Happy New Year. Love being with you, Ryan.